There are several scriptures that I want to have you look at with me this morning. The first one's found in the book of Hebrews, the New Testament, the 6th chapter. Then from there, we'll go back into the Old Testament. In Hebrews chapter 6, Hebrews speaks a lot of the Old Testament and the fact that we have a new and a better way unto God now that Jesus has come and taught and died and rose from the dead. And in the 6th chapter, the writer of the Hebrews is talking about the certainty of the promises that God has given us and looks at the promises that God gave to Abraham. And we'll pick up beginning with verse 9 and read through verse 20. But beloved, by the way, I'm reading from the New King James Version this morning. But beloved, we are confident of better things concerning you, yes, things that accompany salvation, though we speak in this manner. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And so, after he, that's Abraham, had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. For men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end to all dispute. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things, in other words, God's promise and then his oath that he would keep his promise, by these two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters the presence behind the veil, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, having become high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. There's a lot in there I can't even touch on today. But the phrase that I want us to think about is in verse 18. We have a strong consolation, those of us who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. Now, that is a New Testament reference to something that was peculiar to the Old Testament that we may not know much about. But the phrase, we have fled for refuge, comes from the cities of refuge that God commanded Moses and then Joshua to establish in the country of Israel. Now, keeping that in mind, go back in the Old Testament then to Numbers. There are three passages here I want to look at. The first one is found in Numbers 35. Numbers 35. I think we'll just read 9 through 15. It actually goes through 28, but we'll read 9 through 15. Numbers 35. The Israelites are in the plains of Moab, which is on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. They were in the 39th year 40th year of their wilderness wanderings. They're getting prepared to cross over into the promised land. That's the setting then for verse 9. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall appoint cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person accidentally may flee there. They shall be cities of refuge for you from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation in judgment. And of the cities which you give, you shall have 6 cities of refuge. You shall appoint 3 cities on this side of the Jordan, meaning the east side, and 3 cities you shall appoint in the land of Canaan, which will be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the children of Israel, for the stranger, and for the sojourner, or the alien among them, that anyone who kills a person accidentally may flee there. The rest of the passage deals with people who may try to flee there who didn't kill someone accidentally. They did it on purpose, but they're trying to act as if they did. And there are ways God said to deal with that. Now, Moses' final address to the people of Israel is the entire book of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy then, which is the next book after Numbers, the 19th chapter, beginning with verse 1. Deuteronomy 19. When the Lord your God has cut off the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and dwell in their cities and in their houses, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall prepare roads for yourself, and divide into 3 parts the territory of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, that any manslayer may flee there. And this is the case of the manslayer who flees there, that he may live. Whosoever kills his neighbor unintentionally, not having hated him in the past, as when a man goes to the woods with his neighbor to cut timber, and his hand swings a stroke with the axe to cut down the tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he shall flee to one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of blood, while his anger is hot, pursue the manslayer and overtake him, because the way is long, and kill him, though he was not worthy of death, since he had not hated the victim in time past. Therefore I command you, saying, You shall separate 3 cities for yourself. Now if the Lord your God enlarges your territory as he swore to your fathers, and gives you the land which he promised to give to your fathers, and if you keep all these commandments and do them, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to walk always in his ways, then you shall add 3 more cities for yourself besides these 3, lest innocent blood be shed in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and thus blood guiltiness be upon you. Then the next book, this is our last scripture. Moses has now died. Joshua has taken the people into the promised land. They have pretty well conquered it and are settling down. We're getting to the end of the book of Joshua, and Joshua is up in years and ready to perish. And so in the 20th chapter of Joshua, we have this third time then the Lord speaks. Verse 1, The Lord also spoke to Joshua, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Appoint for yourselves cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the slayer who kills any person accidentally or unintentionally may flee there, and they shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood. And when he flees to one of those cities and stands at the entrance of the gate of the city and declares his case in the hearing of the elders of that city, they shall take him into the city as one of them, and give him a place that he may dwell among them. Then if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not deliver the slayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unintentionally, but did not hate him beforehand. And he shall dwell in that city until he stands before the congregation for judgment, and until the death of the one who is high priest in those days. Then the slayer may return and come to his own city and his own house, so that the city, to the city from which he fled. So they appointed Kedesh in Galilee, in the mountains of Naphtali, Shechem, in the mountains of Ephraim, Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron, in the mountains of Judah. And on the other side of the Jordan, by Jericho eastward, they assigned Bezir in the wilderness on the plain from the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. These were the cities appointed for all the children of Israel and for the stranger who sojourned among them, that whosoever killed any person accidentally might flee there and not die by the hand of the avenger of blood until he stood before the congregation. Now, let me give you some background here. Shedding of blood was only atoned for, God said, by shedding the blood of the person who shed the blood. The shedder of blood could only be atoned, the land could only be atoned, and the sin could be taken away only by the blood of the person who shed the blood. Now, this execution of the death penalty was carried out not by the government, not by some legal system, but it was carried out by the avenger. And this is who the word avenger is applying to all through this we read. The next of kin. They were the ones who were to avenge the death of their kinsman. And so, if this is not an ancient concept in many parts of the world. In India, as far as I don't know about the law. We talked about India here earlier, Pakistan, South America. There's a lot of places where it doesn't matter what happened. If you were completely innocent and you hit someone, you struck someone who's riding a motorbike or a bike along the side of the road in the wild traffic they've got, you hit someone and you injure them or kill them, usually the crowd around will kill you on the spot. They'll mob you and just kill you. It's that concept, only slightly more tamed, that was the way things were done in that particular day. It seemed that little attention then was paid to whether the person who was punished really deserved it. Now, to do two things: to protect the person who accidentally was guilty of manslaughter, totally accidental, or justified in the sense of self-defense, or an act, maybe an act of anger, which we recognize in our judicial system. There's first degree. That's premeditated, plotted, planned, intentional. But we also have other degrees. Second degree, an act that a reasonable person might think would end in the death of somebody, but you didn't intend it. You're not charged with first degree. You didn't plot it ahead of time. The passages we read here, one of them mentions pushing someone, it says, in anger, and they fall off the house or whatever happened. Or they fall back and hit their head in the curb and die. Well, that's not first degree. You didn't intend that. There's a degree of culpability, but it's not first degree. So God set up then in the Israelites, in the nation of Israel, for not only the Israelites, but anybody, citizens or not. He set up cities of refuge. They're interesting, at least I think they are. They may not be to you, but let me give you the regulations of the cities of refuge. And then second, the revelation from the cities of refuge. Remember, God never does anything just because he hasn't got anything else to do. Everything he does is exquisitely detailed and intended for some specific purpose, and also usually it has a further meaning, a spiritual meaning to the physical regulation. Now, let me give you what God's stipulated here about the cities of refuge. One, they were located strategically through the nation. If you've ever seen a map of Palestine, and if you see a map of the cities of refuge, they are located 3 on the west side of the Jordan, 3 on the east side. They're located almost parallel to each other, and 2 are in the south on either side, 2 are in the central, 2 are in the north. None of them were located more than half a day's journey away from anybody dwelling in Israel. So he made it very accessible. Second, they arrived there, and we read a little bit of it. It said, you'll have highways, you'll have roads. They maintained highways, central highways, that led to the cities of refuge. And those cities of refuge were to be maintained all the time. They were to be kept free of anything that fell across it, potholes, whatever else. They were to maintain those highways, and every place that any other road intersected it, that would be a possibility for someone to get lost or take a wrong turn. Everywhere there was an intersection, there was a sign painted, 2 words, twice, refuge, refuge. They had to maintain those. So anyone traveling that road who would be in a hurry could make it. No road, those roads were never to be allowed to be closed. They were also Levitical cities. I can't get too far off into this, but I have to explain a little bit. Just to back up, in the same passage where Moses said, you set up 6 cities. Well, those 6 cities came from another grouping of cities, numbering 48. Everybody wide awake? The 48 cities were cities that were given out of the territory of Israel to the Levites. There were 12 tribes of the Israelites. One of them were the Levites. The Levites, out of the Levites came the priesthood. And the Levites were helpers to the priests. The priests worked alone. The Levites couldn't go into the tabernacle or temple proper, only the priests. But the Levites helped in all the sacrifices. All the people brought grain and meat and so forth into to sacrifice, and the Levites helped with all of that. And God told the Levites, you're not going to own any property. I'm not giving you an inheritance of land. I am your inheritance. Then he said, so they divided up the territory among the other tribes. Then he said to each of those tribes, you give cities out of all of your territory to the Levites. And you give, if you've got a big territory, you give a few more. If you've got a small territory, you give a few less. But you come up with 48. And of those 48, he was very specific. He said, you give them the city, and then you measure 3,000 feet, south, north, east, and west, and make a square. And that is their property. Now, in that sense, they had something to live on, but it was communal. That extra property outside the city, the Levites grazed flocks and so forth and had gardens or whatever. And they also, in those areas, sprang up synagogues, what later we called synagogues, where the Levites taught the Bible. They taught the law. They explained Scripture to people. They helped people in their walk with God. And so God salted the whole territory of Israel with Levites, spread them out, so they could minister as they were supposed to. Then of those 48 cities, God said, okay, 6 of them are going to be cities of refuge, meaning the Levites will preside over them. The Levites will apply the law. And it's assumed that they will do it with an eye towards God, that He's not going to put up with anything out of order. So, when they went then to a Levitical city, this was an appointed city. Let me explain it this way. Every one of us can think of, and I'm not saying anything about Gillette. I like Gillette. But all of us can probably think of some city where we used to live or we've been to that we think, man, now that if I ever go, if I had a place, if I could choose, that'd be it. Okay? I grew up around Portland, Oregon. Beautiful, beautiful city. Hopelessly liberal, but who knows whether it's beautiful because everybody's in a pot haze. But nevertheless, we can think of places. If I had a city of refuge, I'd want it to be Portland. But God didn't pick Portland. God picked them. I'll give you their names in a second. God picked them. He says, that's a city of refuge. Well, I don't like that city. I want to go to another city. No. If you want refuge, you go there. There aren't any others. Keep that in mind. You stood before the elders of the city, presented your petition for sanctuary. You ever heard of that? We do today. This is not a new concept. This is not something that is long gone. The notion of fleeing to what is considered holy ground and finding sanctuary there is ancient. And God put some regulations to it. Now, if you're not guilty of first-degree murder, that you were granted haven there. There's 2 more things on the regulations of this city that are important. You had to stay in the city. If you left and the avenger found you, maybe it's 10 years later, but if you left that city and you're wandering on the highway or you're on vacation or going to the beach or whatever, and that person whose brother you ran over in your chariot, if he found you and his heart was still evil towards you and he killed you, he would not be guilty of murder. He would not be charged because you had put yourself out from under the umbrella of refuge. And the second thing, you could leave under one circumstance. You had to stay there until the high priest died. The current high priest, when he died, then you were free to go. You could go back to your original city, and the avenger, if he ever tried anything with you, he would then be guilty. Now, you think, what in the world is all this? There's some truths here that the writer of the Hebrews understood. Now in the Christian age, what are revelations from these cities of refuge? Well, couple thoughts here. Every willful sinner is in immediate peril of the death penalty. The cities of refuge were set up for those who were in peril of being killed. The reason they were in peril was because of the sanctity of life. And even if you took one accidentally, it was a horrible tragedy, and something had to be done about it. An investigation had to be made. We don't do anything differently today. We don't say, well, yeah, so-and-so ran over somebody or somebody accidentally in hunting season shot somebody. Oh, okay, we'll take your word for it. No. It's because life is so sacred that God said anybody who sheds it, we're going to find out if there was any intention at all. And even if there was recklessness, we're going to get to the bottom of it, because it's life made in my image. To uphold the sanctity of life, but to uphold justice, you have cities of refuge. There's a readily available and easily accessible refuge for us. Now, here's what I want us to think about. The Israelite who accidentally or whatever kills his neighbor. He knows that he is in jeopardy. He knows that he's in danger. What would he do? If he had even a couple of watts up here, what would he do? Oh, run his car through the car wash and maybe take some shirts to the cleaners to get ironed, and then he'd wait for the family reunion to get over, and that wasn't until next month. No. He's gone. He is running like mad on that special highway to the place of refuge, and he knew if he kept moving, he could get there before sundown, because they were strategically placed so you could get there. Why should God have to spend 1,500 years writing a book and then call people to do nothing with their lives but beg people to flee to the city of refuge? Does that make sense to us? If someone in that day killed someone, you would think, if they had any sense, the neighbors wouldn't need to gather around, their family wouldn't need to gather around, they wouldn't need to come around and say, hey, listen, you must not get it here. This guy next door just called his brother, who's only a village over, and he's on his way, and he's going to take you out because of what happened here. He didn't care whether it was an accident. He's after you. What's wrong with you that you aren't moving? Notice, the reason I use the New King James Version, usually use the New American Standard. New American Standard was the only version of NIV, King James, New King James, New Living, all these, that doesn't use, and why I don't know, the word fled. Hebrews says, we have fled for refuge. And every place here, it's flee, flee, flee. What does flee mean? Oh, it means walking with your hands in your pocket and kind of looking at stuff and stopping at the creek and looking at, down over the bridge. And no. What does flee? That's used everywhere in the New Testament. We flee the wrath to come. We flee because we recognize the danger. The refuge that we're fleeing to is Jesus himself. He's our city of refuge. He is available. He's close at hand. He keeps the road clear to find him. He's easy to find. The signs are up everywhere and they're maintained. Refuge is just ahead. We have a wonderful high priest. It follows then, with this kind of an offer of mercy, we should flee to it. And who are we fleeing to? What are we fleeing to? quickly, got 2 minutes, and I think I can do it. In chapter 20 of Joshua, notice he listed the cities. I discovered some things here that help me, and I hope they help you. The names of these cities are significant. And remember, God's the one that picked them. He said, you take this one, this one, this one, this one. The names are interesting. First of all, Kedesh or Kadesh. It means holy, consecrated to God, sanctified, pure. I flee to Jesus to make me clean, make me pure, set me apart unto Him, and own me completely. It means also consecrated completely to God. The second city, Shechem. It means ready to help, ready to support, or prop up. I'm fleeing to someone who wants to prop me up, is ready to help me. Third, Hebron, a city today, still under that name, in the news frequently. Hebron, fellowship. That's what the word Hebron means. He said, John, 1 John, if we walk in the light, we have fellowship with Him. I'm fleeing to the best friend I can ever have. The fourth, Bezir, means fortified, secured, safe place. I'm safe in Jesus' hand. I flee to Jesus, and there is no one who can challenge Him. He said, I hold the keys of death and hell. Is there something He can't do? Something He can't help me with? Some sin or addiction or whatever He can't break? No, I'm fleeing to the one who is mighty to save. Fifth, Ramoth, which is to be raised, made high, elevated. It partly has to do with a high place, which is where you build castles. But it a bit more means here that God exalts us. Sin, what does the Psalm say? Sin is a reproach to any people, but the fear of the Lord exalts a nation. It exalts a people. It exalts us. It dignifies us. It elevates us. Not demeans us and dehumanizes us as sin does. Finally, Golan. It is to remove, meaning to take away, give you a way out of grief and trouble. And the other root word is to rejoice. That God gives me freedom and deliverance from the things that would destroy me, beat me down, and He gives me something to rejoice. Even in choosing these cities, God didn't just do a dartboard kind of thing or a lottery. He knew exactly what He was doing when He said, I want Golan, I want Ramoth, I want Hebron. Why? Because that's what He knew He was going to illustrate that you and I can flee to. If we're not knowing that we have taken up residence in God's eternal city of refuge, and finally, that's what heaven will be. No more death, no more darkness, no more temptation, no more disease, no sin. That's the ultimate city of refuge. Flee to it. Don't waste our time. Don't fiddle around. Don't hope you've got another day. I could fall victim to the avenger, Satan. Let's just quiet our hearts for a moment and bow our heads before we pray. And I just want to encourage us to take as seriously our spiritual need of a city of refuge as those then who'd shed blood knew they had to get there as fast as they could. May God help us have that kind of a heart. Flee for the hope that's before us.